In this lesson, we'll be learning to use the gradient tool to fill in areas of our image with a gradation from one color value to another, or even multiple color values are possible. So we'll start with the simplest of all, which is just from one color value to another, in this case black to white. Now with the gradient tool selected, obviously it's in the drop down with the paint bucket tool. Let's have a look at our options bar from left to right. So we have presets. Over here we have the form or the type of gradient that we want to use. We can have a linear gradient, a radial gradient, which comes from the center out. We can have an angle gradient, a reflected gradient, and a diamond gradient. Now out of all of these, the two ones that you would most often use, if any of them besides linear, will be radial gradients. So linear gradient and radial gradient are really the two most common types. But you might experiment with the others, and in certain special case scenarios, they may prove useful for some design project or other. Now, enough with the spiel. How does it work? Well, this indicates, this bar here indicates the gradation. So if I click and then drag away, I know that the black is going to come. I might just restrict that for a second so it's easier to see. Okay. So I've made a selection with my elliptical marquee tool. So the gradient should be restricted just to that. Now you can see, depending on how far you drag your line, that's going to determine the gradation level, whether it's tight or whether it's spaced, whether it's smooth or sharp. And you also determine the direction of the gradient. So if you want a really smooth gradient, start from the left and drag all the way over to the right, and that should give you a nice smooth gradient. What if I want to start with black and end with white? Well, I can untick this reverse checkbox. In your case, this may or may not have been checked. It reverses the order. So if you're starting with black, you'll start with white, etc. You just start at the other end and work back if reverse is ticked. So we've unticked it, and now we're going to begin with black and end with white. So what's dither? Well, let's turn that off and see. Okay. So if I turn on dither, you can see that we have these slightly variegated color values overlapping in the lines of our gradient. If we turn off dither, then we don't have that effect. And transparency at present is turned on, but with opacity turned to 100. That's not going to change much. So if we turn down the opacity, then we can introduce a little bit of transparency. See, like that. We can have build-up effects if we pull multiple times from different directions as well. Okay. So that's the basic use of the gradient tool. Customizing your own gradients. Let's come in here for a minute. And let's choose one of these, one that maybe closely matches what it is that we're trying to achieve. Okay. So in the gradient editor, We can have multiple markers. This, you can click below to add a new one and give it a new color value. And so you're introducing a new color into your gradient. You can add as many of these as you like, and they can be whatever color you like. And their relative positions on the gradient scale are going to determine exactly how your gradient is rendered when you add it to your canvas. Okay. Let's create another selection, this time rectangular in form. And let's switch in our gradient tool to a radial gradient and drag out from the center. And that gives us perhaps a more interesting, or at least an unusual effect. Okay. And just up the opacity and turn off transparency if we want to get rid of the transparency altogether. Okay, and that's the gradient tool. In our next series of lessons, we'll be looking at the blur, sharpen, and smudge tools and how they can be used in the editing of photographs and other images like that.